Welcome to Modern Anarchy, the podcast exploring sex, relationships, and liberation. I'm your host, Dr. Nicole.
I tried to keep her quiet, but she's screaming inside of me. I tried to keep her hiding, oh, shut up. I tried to keep her quiet, but she's a wild, wild woman.
On today's episode, we have Mel. Join us for a conversation about building anarchoqueer communities. Together we talk about having an orgy with the universe, joy as a form of resistance, and releasing demons one orgasm at a time. Hello, dear listener, and welcome back to Modern Anarchy. I am so delighted to have all of you pleasure activists from around the world tuning in for another episode each Wednesday. My name is Dr. Nicole. I'm a sex and relationship psychotherapist providing psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, author of the Psychedelic Jealousy Guide, and founder of The Pleasure Practice, where I support individuals in crafting expansive sex lives and intimate relationships. Dear listener, Mel, what a guest on the podcast. Y'all, Mel and I just run. We run. This episode, there's so much shared alignment and values and vision, and you can feel that in this conversation, honestly. So many of my guests, we often talk about just the different areas in relationships where you align and you have similar understanding and truly the depth of conversation that you can go in those spaces. And this feels like one of those episodes. And so I'm confident you're going to feel it too, because Mel Cassidy and our episode about relationship anarchy versus relationship libertarianism, that was one of the most played episodes of this show, along with the Dean Spade episode. And so, yeah, of course y'all are gonna love this. I'm bringing back one of your favorite speakers. And this episode is just such a reminder of the power of community. We know that our liberation is braided together, and that together we are more powerful than any system. Okay? The more of us that we can bring into the movement, the more powerful we are. And that really means we got to get better at conflict skills. This is something that has been coming again and again in the episodes that I am exploring with different speakers of what it means to really build community, okay? And so I'm really excited to be sharing this episode with you because Mel is such an important guest who has so much wisdom in this area in terms of building community and building relationship anarchy networks. And I am so delighted to be sharing it with you today, dear listener. All right, dear listener, if you are ready to liberate your pleasure, you can explore my offerings and free resources at modernanarchypodcast.com, linked in the show notes below. And I want to say the biggest thank you to all of my Patreon subscribers. You are supporting the long-term sustainability of the podcast, keeping this content free and accessible to all people. So thank you. And as a reminder, dear listener, my Queering Psychedelics Set, Setting, and Sacred Joy in Queer Community free workshop is coming up. It is coming up on April 11th. I'm having it on Zoom so that all of you from around the world can come to this experience. It's from 10:30 a.m. to 12 p.m. Central Standard Time. I have the link in the show notes below. And thank you to all of you who have already signed up. I know we have 300 tickets, space for so many of you to come through. And I am so delighted that so many of you have already signed up with the link below to join. If you are queer and you are doing drugs and exploring psychedelics, this is the space for you. We're going to be stepping into how to have more pleasurable queer psychedelic experiences. So link in the show notes below. And with that, dear listener, please know that I'm sending you all my love, and let's tune in to today's episode. Dear listener, there's a space already waiting for you where you are invited to let go of every old script about sex and relationships and begin living a life rooted in your pleasure, empowerment, and deep alignment. I'm Dr. Nicole, and this is your invitation to the Pleasure Liberation Groups, a transformative, educational, and deeply immersive experience designed for visionary individuals like you. Together, we'll gather in community to explore desire, expand relational wisdom, and embody the lives we're here to lead. Each session is woven with practices, teachings, and the kind of connection that makes real transformation possible. And I'll be right there with you, guiding the process with an embodied curriculum that supports both personal and collective liberation. This is your invitation into the next chapter of your erotic evolution. Say yes to your pleasure and visit modernanarchypodcast.com/pleasure practice to apply. And so the first question that I ask every guest on the show is, how would you introduce yourself to the listeners?
My name's Mel. I am a somatic coach. I am a queer, solo polyamorous relationship anarchist badass.
Hell yes. Yes.
I am a published author.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really excited to be here.
Amazing. I'm so excited to have you back on the show, Mel. I have to say, your episode is one of the most played episodes.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Well, maybe this one will join it. And
yeah, absolutely.
It's
a resonance.
Well listened to.
Yeah. The anarchist community and the ideas and the concepts. So it all comes together.
Well, and I've noticed, and we'll probably get into this more, but I've noticed through the years, there's so many of us who are like, yes, anarchy, this sounds great. Like I am on board with these ideas and these principles. And then we go, oh, but how do we actually do that?
Yeah.
You know, we live in this world that really is not friendly towards some of these ideas. And we're swimming in the soup of heteronormativity and late stage capitalism and oligarchies and everything else. And now, like, you know, increasing fascism. And how do we actually do that work? Because it's not just about shifting external structures, it's changing the internal way that we relate to them and that we relate to each other.
Absolutely. Timely conversation.
Yeah.
Before we get into it and your book and everything that has changed since you've been on the show, I'm curious if you want to share a little bit more about your personal journey to this space. All of the listeners who've never heard you before, how would you tell your story of getting to this space? Yeah.
So I'm a second generation third culture kid. A third culture kid is someone who was born in one culture, grew up in another culture, and now lives in a third. And that was my mom, and then now that's me as well. And so I think the gift of that and the challenge of that is never knowing what's true in a given space, right? There's a lot of cultural code switching that you learn to do when you move between different cultures, and even, you know, between different cultures at home, between your different parents. And I think that gave me always this innate curiosity and never willing to accept the status quo, because I could be told something is one way in one place, and then I go to another country and it's like, well, no, it's a different way here. And it just brought up this curiosity for me all the time of what is true. I have this curiosity about what is true, and is it one thing or is it the other? And so that deep questioning was always with me. Even so, I had a lot of pressure around, and I think it was pressure I put on myself to conform and fit in.
Of course.
And I did what so many of us feel like we have to do, which was I fell in love with someone, and I decided, well, to prove that I'm a successful grown-up, I better get married to this person.
Right.
And I was 22 and I got married. So precious, so
Yeah, so
young. And
young.
I'd never really had a chance to explore my queerness. I knew
Mm,
that I had attraction to multiple people. I think I had a sense that maybe I was slightly kinky, but I didn't really
mm,
know what that meant.
sure.
And we worked on being married for 7 years, and it
Mm,
did not work. I compromised so much of myself. I made myself so small for
mm,
the comfort of others. And when I ended the marriage, I really did so with the intention of I need to not be small anymore. I need to take up space in my own life again.
yeah.
And that was the journey into polyamory for me. That was a journey into my queerness, into my gender experience, into my kink,
Yeah.
into everything else. And I think that the beginning part of that journey was very much and I do talk about this in the book, it was so much happening. It was like a blasting open of my world.
Yeah.
And then a lot of like picking up pieces.
Yeah, yeah.
And thankfully a lot of good support in picking up the pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you know, I started describing myself as being in a primary relationship with myself and having an orgy with the universe.
Amazing. Please tell me more. Yes.
And so that was like the seed for me of this is how I want to relate, because I had done the relationship escalator.
Yeah.
I knew what it was like to achieve success on that, and I knew that it gave me no joy.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really dearly wanted something different. I didn't know what that different was, but I knew that it had to start with me.
Mm-hmm.
And then over time, I was writing a blog about my experiences called Poly Singlish. And over time, I started to hear about relationship anarchy. And then I was like, oh, this really, really resonates for me. And that started me down that path of, it's like the rabbit holes.
Yeah.
It's like it leads you to one thing and then the other and then the other. And,
Yes.
going deep into, oh, what is feminism actually? Like,
Yeah.
I thought I knew what feminism was, but there's more to it. And what does it mean to be anti-racist? What is this white supremacy culture, and how is that showing up in my relationships? And the same time as I was doing that inquiry, I was really feeling confronted in polyamorous spaces
Mm.
by what felt like internalized white supremacy culture. It felt like, and we don't see this so much today, which I think is so interesting. But certainly 10, 12 years ago, a lot of people were very adamant about the term ethical non monogamy.
Right.
And I would always go, but whose ethics are they?
Yeah.
This is the third culture kid in me speaking, right? Whose
Mm-hmm.
ethics? What's ethical in one culture is considered unethical in another.
Right. Exactly.
And we can use ethics to justify shitty behavior if we want to like really loop at things around in our brains. So I was like, there's something missing. There's something missing in the way that we're practicing non-monogamy. It felt like it wasn't informed by that like socio-political awareness. It felt like it was missing a lot of trauma sensitivity.
Mm.
And as people started coming to me and asking for support on their relationships, and I made the decision to go back to school and train to do that, I was like, I really want to lean into that. I want to look for what are the things that we're missing. There are so many ways that people have explored doing open relationships that I think are harmful and avoidable harm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of what led me here.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. So grateful to have you here. When you were talking about the rabbit hole, I've literally warned clients, who are like, I'm curious about it. I'm like, just be prepared. Once you start
Mm-hmm.
reading the books, there is no going back.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Because your consciousness starts to shift. You see the
Yeah.
world in such a different way, and there is no going back to that smaller consciousness as much as the
Yeah.
times where you're scared and dealing with jealousy and you wish maybe I could go back to that smaller consciousness, but you're here now, baby.
Yeah.
You're in it.
You cannot unsee this stuff. Once you see it,
Uh-huh.
you see it
Yeah.
everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so your positioning, right, to be able to see how strong culture influences what we consider to be normal,
Yeah.
even desires, the desires that we have, whether it's for
Yeah.
food or sexual attraction, a
Yeah.
lifestyle, it's so deeply connected to the cultures that we live in. And so that lens is essential, as well as the historical lens in terms of
Yeah.
where we've been as a species, all of that. Wow. I think if someone could have presented that to me as they did in your new book, which is required reading for my pleasure liberation groups, right? Wow. Huge,
Yeah.
huge shift.
Yeah. And there's so many layers to unpack. Like, even as you mentioned, like, who are we attracted to? What
Yeah.
do we find attractive in other people? And how much that is influenced by the media we consume, the messages we are raised with, the gender assumptions we are given. And, through the ages, what we consider beautiful and attractive has changed.
Yep.
It is so subjective. And for me, I think one of the most transformational processes in my journey with that was actually giving myself permission to really seek out erotic imagery of diverse bodies and diverse gender expressions and going, oh, what is happening in me? Like, if I feel an aversion, what's that about? What am I judging here?
Yep.
If I feel curiosity, what is it I'm feeling curious about? If I'm feeling attraction and then creating a fantasy, where is that fantasy coming from? What's feeding that?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
holding that with intense curiosity and a willingness to, I think, be introspective and challenge the things that are not me, but that I've internalized and mistakenly thought of as me.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, because there's such a bend towards sexual and relational desires where we say, this is my innate desire. This is what I have. And I think it lacks, it's a yes and, right? Where, of course, yes, it's you. And as you said, what is attractive across cultures? There's research literally on this concept of how body size, other things, right? It's very specific to cultures. And when you think about even pornography, how many femme bodies do I see with hair out their
Yeah.
armpits or hair on their pussy? Like, oh my God, one of the most natural things is just hair, and we don't even have that. And I know past versions of myself would have scoffed out of disgust to see even like a hairy armpit on a femme, right? And
Yeah.
it's just funny because when you think biologically, that's just very natural. But why do I have this aversion? Right? Like, it's because the society, at least where I'm at, that is not okay. That is judged. We have these strict gender expectations of what it's meant to look like if you're a femme, right? And so
Yeah.
it's hard to kind of create that space for folks when they're trying to, our society represses so much of our sexuality and relating. So to really claim that as like, these are my innate cravings, but also to create space where we can have a little bit of curiosity, as you mentioned, and critical reflection. I think we forget that, there's so many systems of oppression, and it's really uncomfortable to do the work of unlearning those. I don't know who's waiting for that
Yeah.
to be comfortable, because that's not going to happen. You know what I mean? And so you have to understand that your sex life and relationships is no different. There's a lot of stuff for us to clean up in there, and it's not going to be easy.
And this is why I love doing somatic work because, one of the principles of somatics is that we are slowing down to pay more attention. I think that our more impulsive response when something is uncomfortable is we push through, we hurry up, we kind of narrow our vision in, and in so doing, we might skip the really important stuff. And so, one of the things that somatic practices do, which is, it's all about bringing together mind, body, heart, and spirit, is it opens us up to more capacity. It helps us slow down the process. And it actually helps us to notice more of the nuances of how these things are showing up, and helps us to discharge the anxiety and tension and frustration when we're like,
Yeah.
what is going on? Because I think
Mm-hmm.
this is one of the problems we have in our modern culture, where we're, 70 something years deep into this nuclear family paradigm, and our relational skills have atrophied
Yep.
through that. We've forgotten how to be in conflict in healthy ways. We've forgotten how to relate with people who hold different values than we do. We've
Yeah.
forgotten how to be able to engage with deep honoring through those differences. And I think that is crucial, especially with what we see happening in the world today.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. I'm afraid to know what will be happening when we release this in many more months. Like it doesn't feel positive, but I try to be the person to hold on the positivity, but damn, dude. And so part of the work, right, the political work is doing this in our lives. I know when I
Yeah.
think about the world, I immediately go into the trauma reactions, right, of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And where I find some grounding is knowing that I am doing political work every day in the people that
Yeah.
I encounter, whether it's at a store, out at a park, my clients, my friends, my lovers. That is political. And so
Yeah.
that is within my control, right? And so these skills
And
are so, yeah, go ahead.
well, and I think one of the things that the systems of dominance want to do is to create that separation between us. So
Mm,
anytime that we are engaging in our relationships, that's an act of rebellion.
mm-hmm.
These systems also draw power from us feeling powerless,
Right.
from us feeling ashamed of ourselves, and from us making ourselves small, which is why I talk so much about self relationship and self
Mm,
partnership, because that's the antithesis. That's how we push back against that. If you have a well cultivated self relationship, you know how to take up space, right?
yeah.
That's the wise fight response, is I am taking up space, just as the wise flight response is I am stepping away from this because
Mm-hmm.
that's how I'm going to take care of my needs. When we have those wise responses going on, when we're in that deep self relationship, the systems of dominance cannot control us. They might be able to control what's around us, but they cannot control us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we're more powerful together.
We are. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I hold on to that other world and I see that other world and it is powerful. And I'm so grateful that you talk about the body. This is an essential piece to relating. And
Yeah.
when I went through my doctorate, there's so much pain in knowing that I didn't have a single course on working with clients in the
Mm.
body. It is
Mm.
not okay, in my opinion. But there's a long
Yeah.
list of things I could put under that lens of clinical psychology problems. But so we'll pause there for that other podcast. But doing my psychedelic work, that was essential, right? Because there's so much that comes up in the body for somatics on a psychedelic session. And as I was writing my dissertation, some of the folks I interviewed would say how they would go to coaches and other sorts of people because they were way more informed on this. And so
Yeah.
you've always been someone that I hold in my mind as that, who's way more informed on this than any sort of therapist I could find on this topic because they don't fucking include the body. And I'm like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You know what I mean?
Well, and I think that's like white supremacy culture at
Yeah.
work. White supremacy culture wants us to separate from our bodies, wants us to just be talking heads. And so that gets perpetuated in Western psychology.
Yes, it
And,
does.
I come from a background of being a body worker. I'm a second
Yeah.
generation body worker. Up until when I got long COVID a few years ago, I was dancing every week. I am
Mm,
someone who loves being in my body. And part of why I love being in my body is that it helps me manage the impacts of trauma. I come from a family that has intergenerational trauma
yeah.
to the max. We are genocide survivors, we are eugenics survivors, and there's a there's a carry through impact of that through generations.
Hmm.
So to be in my body is an act of resilience and an act of resistance. And to me, I find a lot of somatic discourse will often be like, oh, it's mind, body, and heart, or
Mm,
it's um mind, body, and spirit. They'll like
mm.
leave one of them out. And the way that I learned to engage in somatics was that you have all four. And I find that, when we're overwhelmed, when we're scared, when we're under resourced, those four move out of relationship with each other. I think many of us like to be nerdy. We will go into
Oh,
our
yeah.
intellect
Oh, yeah.
because it's such a safe place to be. I can
Wow.
create terms and I can draw
Yeah.
out maps, and that can
Woo.
be great to help us orient to new experiences that we have no context to understand. But if we forget about our body, then it's like, oh, I've been on my computer for hours and I forgot to eat,
Yep.
which is something I'm
Yep.
definitely guilty of
Oh,
doing.
yeah. I feel you.
Or we get so in our head that when someone comes to us to share something that's deeply emotional, instead of responding with empathy, we're responding with trying to fix. Or we respond with spiritual bypassing, right? We can dissociate into any of these parts. We can dissociate into spirit. And I'm sure that you have probably seen some of the similar things that I have in terms of people being like, it's all going to be fine. Just think positive. And yeah.
Yep. Yep.
And there's a lot to be said for like, your mindset shifting the way that you're able to engage in
Right.
something.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that without integration of the other parts is only going to get you so far.
Mm-hmm.
And we can also sometimes dissociate into our bodies. I think of the times when I'm like, I just need to move my body because it's too difficult to feel my feelings.
Yeah.
There was a time in my life where I was going obsessively to the gym
Mm.
when I was going through a lot of anger. And I think it was
Great.
helpful.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was
That's
really
awesome.
cathartic. And I was very conscious that, oh, at some point, I'm going to need to actually stop and feel the things that are going on
Mm.
inside.
Mm-hmm.
So recognizing these dissociative responses, and I think also recognizing, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn as responses that in the short term are incredibly wise and incredibly helpful when we're navigating things that don't feel safe or that are
Right.
feeling overwhelming, which happens so much when we're exploring new ways of relating that no one's ever given us a map for.
Woo.
But what's important is bringing them back together,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
bringing ourselves back into relationship with ourselves. Because
Yeah.
again, that's how we resist the systems of oppression.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I hear this as a deep embrace of the embodiment of anarchy, right? In many
Yeah.
ways. And there's probably people who have spoken to this, but I'm feeling that come through now of what are the power structures that impact our embodiment. And I always speak about how, it's not all about orgasms, of course. But if you really want to experience orgasms, you got to be able to take up the space. You got to be able to cry because there's
Yeah.
such a deep connection between the pain and the pleasure. You don't get to pick and choose which emotions you feel. So if you're really a pleasure activist, you're really going to feel all of that joy in your erotic life. You're going to be crying too. And
Yeah.
I hate to break it to you, right? But that is
Yeah.
that is just what life is. You're going to feel all of it.
Well, when you look at where that experience comes from in our nervous system, right? The deepest experiences of pleasure are about being connected to your ventral vagal system, which is your relational part of your nervous system. It's the front part of your nervous system. It's the part of the nervous system that invigorates your facial expressions, your breathing, your digestion. And I think of it as like my Care Bear stare of
Mm,
like, okay, here I am. I'm showing up with this. And we cultivate more capacity the more we give ourselves permission to experience pleasure and joy. And when we're holding back from that in any shape or form, like if I'm holding back from that emotionally, I'm going to end up holding back from that erotically. I'm going to end
yep.
up holding back from that socially. because the nervous system is just going to be like, oh, no, don't want to put
Yep.
energy here. And at the same time, one can be the doorway into the other. So for
Mm-hmm.
some people, they find they can access more erotic depth through, first of all, feeling that emotional relationality. Some people find that they can access more erotic depth by, first of all, feeling like, oh, we can live and breathe the same values together. That allows me to deepen into my experience of pleasure and eroticism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's so much to step into with the body and feeling that pleasure and feeling the safety of it with the systems we have, because the world is what the world is right now. So it's hard to tap into a play space and a safety space. And also the systems of relating that in my own life, I've felt, all of my lovers are supportive of what I'm doing with multiple
Yeah.
connections. And also this level of guilt and shame that has made it hard to really feel that pleasure when you're engaging erotically. It's almost easier in the more like romantic, platonic ways of relating with my lovers. But when we step into that sexual space, the amount of cultural messages that are just, oh, so deep in my body. And so every time I orgasm with a lover, I'm like, oh, I'm releasing demons. I am releasing demons because when I've had group experiences with all of them together, it's like
Yeah.
there's so much like shame going on where I'm like, is this okay? And they're like, yes, Nicole, we love you. We're all supportive. This is great. And just the cracking open in my body that has occurred
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
group experiences, it is spiritual and transcendent and deeply political.
And it's that group attachment experience, right? I strongly feel like we need to really re-examine how we understand attachment, because
Yes.
the original attachment studies were done at the same time as the nuclear family propaganda, and they're highly biased towards that. And as human beings, we did not evolve in nuclear families. We evolved in villages. We evolved with tribes. We evolved with extended families. And many cultures that are, have resisted colonialism or that are non-Western still have, you have that experience of extended family networks and kinship networks. And for us as people who are living in Western culture, I think that part of the craving for exploring non monogamy does tie to this hunger for a wider network of connections.
Yeah,
And sex doesn't have to be the only way we create those.
of
I think
course.
sex just happens to be, a really fun way to celebrate that if
Yeah,
everybody's into that.
yeah. Yeah.
But what's happening in our nervous system is when we're allowing ourselves to deeply relate and build those experiences of consistent compassion, care, kindness, affection, love, intimacy, we're creating a wider web of attachment.
Mhm.
And that's the ecosystem that we have. We're not on that escalator that the nuclear family encourages, that here's your one person and it's your ride or die until the end.
Yeah.
It's you have this wider ecosystem. And in the midst of all the changes that the world is going through, in the midst of the rights that governments are trying to take away from people, the wider your ecosystem, the more resources you're going to have to be able to pivot and shift and still feel supported, because you're not resting everything on a single pivot, on a single anchor point.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're stronger together.
We are stronger together. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so true. If we look at this very short period of time with a nuclear family, very, 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 very small. It's difficult because, of course, we're in our bodies right now. Anyone who's listening to this, you're in your body right now. We max live what, about 100 years if we're lucky, and so we get so locked into our own perspective. And so that's why I love history. When you just draw it out a little bit and you look at the actual historical timeline, you're like, oh wow, this is just a blip
Yeah.
on the history of humanity. And then the additional layer that there are ongoing cultures around the world who do not live like we do in nuclear families. There's lots of diversity, right? And so the white Western field of psychology, when they look at anything other than that as problematic, quote unquote, underdeveloped, or whatever other
Hmm.
nasty words they're going to use, some problematic shit. And so, yeah, updating the field of attachment is so necessary. I have an email that I send out for my pleasure activist listserv about this specifically because the concepts of attachment often are so static, right? Where I'll hear
Yeah.
clients tell me, oh, I'm anxious avoidant, or I'm avoidant, or this. And the understanding of multiplicity with relationships and expansive relating, you'll see how that client, myself, and all of my friends, right, will have one way of relating here and we're avoidant, and then this other one over here where we're completely anxious, all at the same time. We're that same
Yeah.
person, but the field is so monogamous that it only looks through that one lens. The second you add multiple, you're like, well, that's not okay. This is more of like a quantum understanding of the systems and the things that are going on that are impacting all of that.
Yeah. And Jessica Fern talks about this in her book Polysecure, that, the way that we experience attachment is going to be different depending on how that partner shows up for
Yep.
us. And and I would add to that that the way we show up for ourselves, right, bringing that integration of all of our parts is also part of how we're creating that internal experience of secure attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that experience of resilience, our ability to trust that we can bounce back. And then what that also does is it gives us more capacity to be present to the here and now rather than feeling stuck in the past or trying to be like, I want to be like it was before, or
Yeah.
getting stuck in future thinking and fantasizing about what could be one day. And so to, bring it all together and be super present to the here and now, we're more present to our partners, we're more present to our loved ones, we're more present to
Mm-hmm.
what's happening in the world around us. Like there are
Mm-hmm.
so many benefits to being
Mm-hmm.
able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so I think that's where that observer's mindset, a bit of mindfulness to be able to see all the thoughts that are going on and take that step back, right? To ground in the body as we spoke, right? And when you see all of those narratives going on of who you are and what you're doing, when you can take a step back and have the curiosity of who sold me this narrative, who
Mm-hmm.
profits off of this narrative, right?
Yes.
And then say,
Yes.
what new narrative do I want to write? That is a really empowered space when you have that level of awareness to your life.
Yeah.
And it's a skill, right? That's what I'm always telling my clients, right? Is how if you've not been practicing that, it's like trying to learn any new skill, riding a bike, whatever it is, right? Running the marathon. You don't just wake up the first day and run the 32 miles, right? For, at least for me, you run a quarter of a mile and you say, damn, I do not have the lung capacity of the muscles for this. And then you got to keep working at it, right? These are new neuronal pathways. And so these radical ways of relating, we don't have roadmaps for that. We don't have these neural pathways. And so the more you flex that muscle of the neural pathway, the more it gets myelinated, the faster it fires, right? And so you have to
Yeah.
have compassion for yourself when you're in that
Yeah.
process of unlearning all of the systems, which is a lifelong practice, let's be clear. But at the beginning, it is a lot. It's a pretty intense come up, like any other psychedelic trip when you drop down the rabbit hole. It's a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
coming up.
Well, and that's why I find it helpful to, create a map for what we're
Yeah.
doing. So I
Mm-hmm.
talk about this in the book, this idea that this relationship landscape has quadrants, that
Mm-hmm.
there are, we have erotic relationships, we have emotional relationships, we have practical relationships, we have social relationships. And within each of these quadrants, we have different layers of relating. These layers represent the depth of trust, the safety, the intimacy we feel. And so once we have a framework where we can start to situate ourselves within or situate our individual experiences within, I think it becomes a little less overwhelming. Like it's a little
Mm-hmm.
easier to wrap our heads around and conceptualize when
Mm-hmm.
we go, oh, okay, I'm not doing that linear trajectory. It's not
Right.
just, from A to B to C. This is three-dimensional. And I just need a map for the three dimensions to understand what it is and where I am. And from there, maybe we have a little more capacity
Yeah.
to step forward and more consciously engage in it, rather than, I think what happens for a lot of people is we get into a space where we're like, it's too much, and it feels like
Right.
it's leading
Ah.
us rather than us
Yeah.
being the agent of it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Absolutely. I've been there. I've been there. Yeah. I feel like in my career, there's two goals I really want to work towards and devote myself to, which is to end rape culture. I'm going to do my best to
Mm,
do that. And also to invite the world to understand that we all have multiple relationships. We were talking about that
yeah.
of language, of opening doors for people and what resonates, right? I feel like that starting point is very based in relationship anarchy of rather than these are my partners and these are my friends and this dichotomy. What if we understand, which are great labels if you want to use them, I do use them, but to understand that we all have multiple relationships,
Yeah.
I think that's a powerful place to start and really create this frame.
And that we are bound together in an ecosystem,
Yeah.
that what happens to you impacts me. And this was one of the pieces of rhetoric that has always frustrated me in polyamory spaces, where they're like, just don't take on anyone else's shit.
Mm,
And I'm like, it's not that easy, because we are in a shared experience. And it is important that I allow myself to feel what I feel, even if what I feel doesn't make logical sense.
yeah. Yeah.
Emotions are not always
Oh,
logical,
yeah.
and that's
Woo.
okay.
Yeah.
And to actually feel it, because the feelings are a doorway into something else. The emotions we have are clues into our own humanity. And when we shut down from how other people's actions impact us,
Yeah.
we're shutting down from relationship.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Mm-hmm.
shutting down from connection. And then
Mm-hmm.
we're playing into that Western hyper individualism, which is not healthy self relationship,
Right, right, right,
right?
right.
Healthy self relationship gives you more capacity for relationality with others.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Deeper interconnection, right?
Yeah.
Interdependence rather
Yeah.
than hyper individualism or codependence. It's about interdependence with the whole community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is tricky when it comes to words like rules, commitments, boundaries, stuff like that, preferences. For example, the deeper I get into this, the more caution I have to relating to folks who are newer to this. And I know that's a common
Mm-hmm.
experience. Not to say that I don't do it, but it is something that I do with a lot of caution because of how significant, as much as when I have a new client who's never done a psychedelic before in my
Yeah.
office, I
Yeah.
have more caution to that of what that
Yeah.
can be
Of
for them and
course
that
you do.
responsible, right? And so in my relating life, when someone's newer to it, I hold that not as a judgment, but as an important piece of information. And so with my partners, I'm like, like it would be great if you could find other connections that are also experienced here, right? And I've gotten some feedback from my lovers of like, well, you were once new and it's my choice. And it's like, yes, it is your choice. And also, that choice that you make does impact me, right?
Yeah.
Because we all do kitchen table dynamic. And so that means that
Mm.
person is going to be in the spaces. And if that person is in a really tight, constricted nervous system
Yeah.
and they look at me in a certain way, that is really tough to deal with. And
Yeah.
so I keep just saying it's my preference, not a requirement, not a rule, but a preference. And then stepping into that deeper space of trusting my partners to have discernment around that. But it's really tricky.
It is tricky. And I would say there are even people who've been doing non-monogamy for years who do not have that awareness of like
Mm.
the interrelationality. There are people who have done non-monogamy for 20 years or more who are deeply codependent. Their codependency just functions with more people.
Yeah.
And I think I've experienced this in my own life of
Mm-hmm.
having challenges come up because the people I'm engaging with seem to be really experienced in non-monogamy, but their approach lacks the intersectionality lens that I take. Their approach maybe misses the nuances that I have around attachment and unpacking internalized narratives around expectations and labels and
Yeah.
everything. And, sometimes I've had an easier time dating someone who's maybe not brand new, but like has come to it later when there's more of this conversation has been out there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, I think for me, I've learned to just go with each individual. Like it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this.
Right.
I took to polyamory like a duck to water. Like I
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
quickly had a sense of what I wanted and what I didn't want. My
Mm-hmm.
biggest challenge was then explaining that to people who were so used to it being one particular thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much variety, right? It breaks my heart when I see the research that is very like this bifurcation of monogamy versus non-monogamy as the research and those being the two variables. It like literally makes me shudder because
Mm,
it's like, oh, like there's so much more under that label, and each one is
yeah.
very nuanced, as you're saying, of how intersectionality is a part of that or how they go through that. And then the tricky thing is someone can use a label and end up practicing it very differently than what you think that label means.
Well, and we see that with how people use the term relationship anarchy. There's, for me, relationship anarchy is about how do I deconstruct the default systems of hierarchy of
Yep.
relationships.
Yep.
Whereas for some people, what they're practicing is more of like a relationship libertarianism.
Yep.
And it's a little more individualistic and perhaps chaotic and perhaps callous about the emotional state of others and the impact that they have. And so, there's a lot of fuck boys out there
Yeah.
basically calling themselves, and I say fuck boys and can be any gender,
Yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
like calling themselves relationship anarchists. And I'm like, I don't think that means what you think it means. Let's talk about what does
Mm-hmm.
that look like for you?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so for me, part of my process has been about like, how do I get clear about what this means for me? And there's a lot of people who will be like, yeah, I'm on board with the relationship anarchy, but I don't know about the other aspects of anarchy. And I'm like, can you actually separate them? I used to think that you could, and now I think like, no,
Yeah.
they are deeply bound together because the systems we're fighting against, the systems that we are pushing back against and dismantling in our practice of relationship anarchy are political systems. They are systems of cis heteronormativity. They are systems of patriarchy and misogyny. They are systems of colonialism. They are systems of capitalism that feed on the nuclear family.
Yeah.
That they are deeply, deeply political in nature.
Yes. The starting point, right, is that the personal is the political.
Yeah.
And if we start there, then yeah, there is no way to remove yourself from the politics of the practice. And I think that is
Yeah.
essential. I'd love to hear more about how you see that deeply connected for me and all of the listeners to really step into the power of your consciousness.
Mm. I was very aware as I was writing the book, which was, in the run up to the 2024 elections in the
Mm.
United States. I live in Canada,
I know, I was gonna say, I remember. I thought
but
you were safe. You lucky.
but
Woo!
again, we are in an ecosystem.
Yeah,
What
we are.
happens in the United
Yes,
States affects everybody
it's true.
because of the power, the economic power that the United States has held. And I was very aware of everything I'm writing is the antithesis of Project 2025.
Yep.
It's the antithesis of this. They're wanting to return to the nuclear family. They're wanting to go back to this imagined golden age of women being in the home and all of this absolute bullshit.
Yep.
And I'm like, everything I'm writing is the complete opposite of that. And writing it that way, I was like, I also need to make sure I'm talking about how this is actually more resourcing and safer for us.
Yep.
And I have a whole chapter about queerness and anarchy, and really looking at the two of them side by side. I was like, they feel like one and the same. You know, queerness as a modern concept is all about how we question our sexuality, our gender, the ways that we relate. And anarchy is all about how we question the systems that we are told that we have to subscribe to. So they're interlinked. And I think that to become an anarchoqueer is to reimagine the whole system and structure of how we relate. We're looking at, is it about gender? Is it about sexuality? Is it about the number of partners I have? Does it matter whether I have sex with these people or not? You know, I love using the term anarchule, and I throw that
I
out
love
there into the
that.
world because
Yeah.
to me, polycule just didn't cut it,
Mm-hmm.
because it felt like it created separation
Right.
with the friends who I just adore.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
my friends are my secure attachment network. My
Right.
friends are my support system.
Yeah.
And they are, I think, even more important to me these days than the people I'm
Mm-hmm.
dating. So that then becomes the priority. That's how I'm queering up the way that I do my non-monogamy, even.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, going back to this idea of like becoming a narco queer, we get to leave the relationship escalator, all the hangovers from mononormative stories, the nuclear family, all of the systems behind. And we kind of rewild
Yeah.
the relationship landscape. We get to rewild the ways that we are relating with each other. And that's what I mean when it's about going into a post-monogamous world. It's there could still be, you know, fidelitous pair bonds within
Right.
this world. It's not saying that monogamy isn't going to be there. It's saying that monogamy is no longer the default, that we hold openness and curiosity from moment to moment about what feels like the best path forward in our relationships.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yep, that's something I've spoken to on the podcast of for folks who are relationship anarchists and want to have sexual fidelity. Maybe we use that word rather than monogamy, which has a very complex history and lineage of thought. So it's like if you want to have sex with one person, hey, I'm a relationship anarchist who practices sexual fidelity. What a way to get outside of that label that has so much. And also, even that label, if we really just sit with it for a second, of monogamy, right?
Yeah.
Historically, let's be clear, that label meant one sexual partner for a life. And so historically, women, people were killed if you didn't practice that, right?
Yep.
And so we practice serial monogamy now as a culture,
Yep.
right? Often of one partner at a time. And even that could be put with a big asterisk when we look at the rates of infidelity, right? So it's like,
Well,
how
and you
many?
get into the questions of what are we including as infidelity?
Right.
Is it infidelity if you're having an emotional affair? Is it infidelity if you're cuddling with somebody but you're not having intercourse with them? You know, the
Yeah.
definitions get tricky and nuanced, and I am all for, as part of my own anarchy process, is can I describe what I'm doing without relying on a single label?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think that's so much more useful. Like, I think labels are helpful when they are descriptive, but we make assumptions of labels. Like your version of monogamy could be different from my version of monogamy. And if we think we're in a monogamous relationship, are we on the same page? Let's talk about what that means. Again, that's where it's helpful to talk about emotional, practical, social, erotic, in these ways of like, okay, what's exclusive? What's not?
Mm-hmm.
What depth are we going to? Where is the capacity for us to grow? Where are the
Mm-hmm.
places where we're not going to grow well together because of different needs and different desires and different boundaries? So that is, I think, a lot more helpful in the long term than having these singular labels that we lean on.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Getting more into the nuance of what does that look like for you when you're connecting with new people? Sure, they use that label, but that follow-up question can be so powerful. What does that look like in practice? How do you
Yeah.
navigate multiple connections? What are the values that are important to you? I'll learn way more about someone than just the label, right? And that even goes for myself too, and the labels that I might have a little bit more aversion to at times. I've noticed I have some like non-monogamous labels when I'm connecting with people. I'm a little bit like, ooh, spooky, scared. Like, what are the, what does that mean? You know? And then sometimes you get to meet them in practice. You're like, oh, okay, there's more emotional depth here than I thought. But, so there's just so much more in the actual practice of it. And when I think about the anarchy of our connections, yes, it's the full community. And I like
Mm-hmm.
to ask the listeners, this question with relationship anarchy of how much diversity do you see in your community?
Yeah.
How much diversity of race, class, age, spiritual relation, like religious, or the whole thing, ability, right? And if your friend group is aimed towards a specific narrow pathway,
Yeah.
what does that say? Right? Even the therapists who, like, all of our, a lot of therapists are working with people in, I spent a whole year doing community mental health, low
Wow.
SES Medicaid year, wow, of my
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
How many people in my community do I have as friends that are in a similar state as that?
Yeah.
And why
Yeah.
is it harder to relate with people? I think that's a
Yeah.
real thing that I even experience, right? It's harder to relate to people in that space. But what does that mean politically if we sit at that and say, well, we just don't have a similar lifestyle. I just have this money and they don't, so I can't relate, right? Do you see how fast we've
Yeah.
built this system where we're really not relating across these lines?
Well, and we start to other people.
Yes.
And I deeply believe that it is the systems of dominance that have sowed some of those divisions.
Yeah.
It's the whole like left eating its own tail kind of thing is deliberate to prevent us from being able to continue building these deep relationships and to form a united front against
Mm-hmm.
fascist forces.
Yeah.
So, when when we when we exclude people, when we other them from us, we're hurting ourselves. And it's been an interesting journey for me, going through the height of the pandemic as someone who knew they were going to be high risk and taking a lot of precautions and having a lot of people in who I considered to be part of my community not taking it so seriously
Yeah.
and even going some very different directions with it, and then
Mm.
to then develop long COVID after having COVID
Oh.
and feel like I don't have the capacity, and grieving that in myself,
Mm.
grieving that I didn't have the capacity because I now have this chronic illness that reduced my
Yeah.
capacity, and then working with that grief and processing through it to slowly move into a space of, well, where can I find the capacity to still engage? How do I make sure that I'm not caught up in that self-confirming bubble?
Mm.
Like, I think between the way that algorithms feed us
Yeah.
content on social media
Woof.
and the ways that we've kind of gotten used to, like, well, I disagree with them. They're cut out of my life. In non-Western context, that is horrific to do because you're removing somebody potentially who was part of your ecosystem. And even weeds have a function to play in an ecosystem. Maybe you don't want to get overrun with weeds. Maybe you want to make sure you don't have too many weeds. But when you are weeding your relationship landscape, how are you making those choices, and where can you transplant relationships to? And again, this is where I find this idea of the layers of relating is really helpful, because maybe in my like nervousness and uncertainty about a new relationship, I like leaned in too much and
Mm.
I brought them into like a deep space of vulnerability and intimacy with me. And then I'm like, oh my God, we have very different political views. I could just be like, nope, you're done.
Yeah.
You're out. Or I could go, what's the distance? This is from Prentice Hemphill. What is the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously? Maybe it's less time with them. Maybe it's taking some space, but making sure that they're still somewhere in that ecosystem. I have a play partner who is very politically moderate.
Mm.
And it's so fascinating to me to have conversations with this person because they have, I think, at the core, they're a left-leaning moderate who has a lot of the same aspirations and values as I do. But they're kind of like, why do we have to get so bound up in the labels that feels like it makes everybody feel more different? Why can't we all just get along? And I see where they're coming from. And then we get to have the conversation about, like, well, why it does matter for people. And we get to unpack privilege,
Yeah.
and there's something really beautiful in being able to hold space for those conversations. Now, I don't think I could do that with someone who is like right wing. I will
Yeah.
own that
Yeah.
because I am very left leaning. But I want to be able to create that space for people who are more moderate to at least hold curiosity and at least develop an understanding. Because I think what I've found is that folks who are kind of hanging out in that more moderate space, they're very scared of losing connection if
Mm.
they go too far either way.
Mm.
And people who go really far either way, we're kind of not so scared of losing connection. We kind of just trust we're going to find lots of connection when we
Yeah.
get there. And I feel like, yeah, we need to do more to like have that interrelationship and keep those communication open. The shutting down of relationality is a nervous system response to overwhelm. And, I look at what's happening in the world today with like, people moving towards more like fascist extremism. And I look at what's happening in the States, which is so, so incredibly heartbreaking. And what I see in a lot of people who are being hoodwinked by those fascist messages, it's very similar to what happened in Germany under Hitler, is people are scared, people are under-resourced, and they're being given a story. And even if the story isn't true, believing in the story makes them feel safer. So, if we want to like really address that, we have to go, okay, well, what is the core nervous system need here? How do we engage with that core nervous system need? To do that, we have to be relational. And to be relational, we have to do that work in ourselves so that we can actually show up. And we can't show up as individuals for that relationality because that's not safe. We have to show up together. We have to do that work together as our communities, as our anarchules, as our collectives. It's work we have to do together.
Yeah, and it's a skill. It's such a skill to be able to know, as you were speaking to the quote of the distance where I can love myself and love you simultaneously, or I've used some of the
Mm-hmm.
metaphors of the sun, right? There's a space where the earth is too close and we would burn, and too far away
Yeah.
where it'd be too cold, right? So where is that space where you can do that? It's hard because the society that we live in, this capitalistic society, profits off of us lacking emotional insight and skills.
Yeah.
You're a much better cog in the machine if you don't have all of these skills and you cannot
Yeah.
band together. So the more we don't teach that in school and just push you into a pipeline of working into the system, the easier it is to maintain power and control, right? And so when you see something that's different than you have that reaction in the body of fear, othering, no, I don't like this. This is foreign. I don't know what this is. No, 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 shut down, right? Or if someone's too close and you don't like how they related to you, it can also be that quick shutdown of, I just didn't get a good vibe from that person. Goodbye. I didn't like them, right? Goodbye. Or even the field of psychology itself often pushes this narrative of just
Yeah.
separate from your parents, just leave them
Yeah.
behind. Yeah, they're not treating you. They don't have the emotional availability that you need, which generationally, there's been such an increase in emotional awareness, I think, with the internet and resources and stuff like that,
Yeah.
that previous generations did not have. So it's a complex space that I think a lot of younger people are navigating with their parents. And so all of that, right, that's the water we're living in. And so then to find the skills when your body is flaring up and you feel uncomfortable with this person with this
Mm-hmm.
strange view that you've never heard of before or unsure of, and your body's going into that panic mode, right? To be able to regulate and then have the language to name, hey, I would like to see you this amount of time with this amount of
Yeah.
spaciousness, which is saying a no. That
Yeah.
so many people freak the fuck out about saying a no. They're like, oh my God, I must say yes. I must please this person, right? So the
Yeah.
ability to say, like, this is how close I want to orbit to you. There's so many skills to first regulate, identify what you need, state it, and then practice it, and then even find out if maybe it needs to be adjusted because consent is ongoing. So maybe you
Yeah.
said you wanted this amount of relating, and that actually feels like too much, and now you want to take a step back. And now there's a lot of emotions about that for both parties, and it is
Yeah.
tricky.
And it is so tricky to not make a story about the
Yeah.
experience.
Oh, yeah.
I think the story making
Oh,
part
man.
is such a wonderful part of our brains.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it also can sabotage us. And one of the practices I love is embracing, what if this is all meaningless?
Mm-hmm.
Not in a way of like I'm going to behave recklessly, but what if it's just okay that sometimes there's friction and I don't have to pretzel myself around that. I can continue to show up and take up space and trust that I'm not taking away space from someone else. I can continue to show up and maybe pull back a little bit because it doesn't feel good for me to show up with more than that in that particular relationship. And it doesn't have to be a commentary. I mean, I see this happen so much in long-term couples when they're like, oh, the sex has changed.
Yeah, of course.
And there's the story we make about that of like, we're not having the same kind of sex anymore. The sex is different. It's not exciting like it was at the beginning. Oh, that must mean something is wrong, or that must mean I have to break up with this person.
Yeah.
And I mean, for one thing, our bodies change, our nervous systems go through shifts, our hormones are not consistent. There is always going to be change in your libido and the kind of sex you're having with people that you do have sex with. And it's okay. It doesn't have to mean anything. It's just a different way of exploring. And I think when sex changes in a relationship, it's an invitation to explore other ways of relating.
Yep. And I love the word win. Not if.
Yeah,
but win. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like let's stop fantasizing that what is now is always going to be. Let's get real. The only constant in the universe is change.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So bring that into your sex life and hopefully more and more expansion in it. At least my chest opens up more and more as I go through that process, And so I'm hearing the importance of the narratives that we're telling ourselves, right? Which again comes from the society that we live in, right? So if I haven't seen models of this, it's hard to imagine that other world. It's hard to imagine a world without money. Yeah, what does that look like? My body's like, what? But it's possible. Yeah. We existed before. Yeah. And so we need more narratives of what is possible. And when we are writing those narratives, which thank God for books, thank you, the podcast space, right? Narratives, here we go. Those narratives, we want them to be thick. This comes from narrative therapy, right? We really want them to be thick rather than these thin narratives. And so the thin narrative is when you go in conflict and you say, well, that guy's an asshole. He's a piece of shit. He's actually a narcissist. I'm going to walk away. What a thin narrative that the field of psychology perpetuates. Hello. And so we need much more of a thicker narrative of what are the context of this person? What is the lineage that they come from? What is the ecosystem that they're around that is creating this? And that's not to say that you have to relate with that person. We can still take a big, big, big step back. But that narrative is way too thin. And I think creating these boundaries and these lines that are ultimately hurting us when so many people just go into that space of they're an asshole, they're a piece of shit, like just all
Yeah.
of the slew of bad words rather than the context and compassion.
What I love holding as a question is, what if everything we do is somehow a strategy for safety?
Mm-hmm.
And so when
I almost
someone's
spit out
doing
my tea there. I
something,
was like, yeah, obviously, yes.
when someone is doing something that doesn't make sense to me, and I notice that voice of judgment, that like thin narrative coming in, I try to pause and go, okay, how is this for them a strategy for safety? Maybe it's because it's familiar to them. And so even if it's chaotic, familiar chaos feels
Yeah,
safer than
exactly.
unfamiliar calm. What if it's, this is their strategy for taking up more space? What if this is their strategy for running away? What if this is their strategy for asserting their needs? What if this is the only strategy they've been given? This is the strategy that worked for them when they were 8 years old and they've stuck with it. And it doesn't work so much now that they're 48 years old.
Yep, exactly.
But that I find is such a fantastic way to open into what is the depth of what's going on in us. Because for us as individuals, too, to go and look at what we do and go, how is this my strategy for safety? Like you're saying, like that kind of pop psychology wants to label everything narcissism.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, well, like, yes, I think that there is a lot of narcissistic behaviors that are encouraged in our society.
Yeah.
And also, where's that coming from in the nervous system? It's coming from the same place as our fight response. And I think of that now as it's the self assertion response. It is, I've learned I have to take up space in a big way in order to not be annihilated, in order
Right.
for my selfhood to not be removed. And how many of us have had that experience of feeling like our selfhood is being threatened with annihilation? That is what white supremacy does. That is what patriarchy does. It
Mm-hmm.
threatens you with annihilation unless you take up an inordinate amount of space. And so for many, narcissism has become the survival strategy in this system.
Yeah.
And conversely, your survival strategy for that threat of annihilation of self might be to make yourself small. It might be to go into self-sacrificing. It might be
Right.
to become a rescuer,
Right.
because then you learn, oh, I have purpose and I am useful. And as long as I'm useful, I will somehow be safe. And I think so. This is, I mean, I could probably talk for hours about this, but this is going into
Yes.
those nuances of like, how do we, through understanding the nervous system, through understanding the nervous system impulses and reframing them, I think, in less judgmental ways, how do we get to that deeper narrative of what's actually going on inside of ourselves and inside of our loved ones?
Yes, absolutely. Because that's the compassionate narrative, right? Is this is someone
Yeah.
trying to stay safe. And so when you see that, again, that does not mean that you have to be close to that person. And we could get into what it means to heal as a collective and not push everyone into the capitalistic structure of society. So that's like a whole other podcast, too, right? Of like, what does that mean, collective healing? But you can still hold that nuance with compassion to understand
Yeah.
that's how someone is trying to keep themselves safe. And I almost spit out my tea when you said it, because when I went through the field, I did have a feminist mentor who trained me in feminist psychology, and relational cultural theory specifically talks
Yeah.
about this as the lens. And so you can imagine when I was in my internship for the last year of my doctorate, I was teaching psychiatry residents who had no foundation of psychology at all, but that was my job to like teach them. And so I was like, people are doing things for survival of wanting to be connected. And they looked at me with these like dumb flat faces of like, what? Like, no, bipolar, like just like so many things. And I was just like
Yeah.
trying to like start that worldview that you're saying here, which I think is so essential. And thank God for the feminists in the 70s who came through to say, hey, this is actually what causes suffering, is lack of
Yeah.
connection. We know
Yeah.
that from day one, that babies need to be seen. We know the still face experiment for the listener, like when the baby doesn't have a caregiver that responds in attunement to them, they start to scream and panic because we
Yeah.
need that, right? We lose our concepts of reality when we're not connected to people if you're on an island by yourself, right? So we are deeply relational beings, and it's so survival based for us to need connection. And so they would always talk about the relational paradox, that moment where there's some part of yourself that you want to bring into the relationship, that if you do, there's a fear that you could lose connection with the other person. However, if you do not honor the uniqueness of that part of yourself that you have, you lose connection with yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
there's the
Mm-hmm.
paradox right there. And
Yeah.
they would quite literally from that extrapolate all mental suffering in the DSM, right? In terms of that being the heart of it, of ways that we go through that and try to keep ourselves
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, we're kind of going back to the like, how useful are the labels?
Yeah.
It is much more useful and practical to describe what's going on internally. What is it that the nervous system needs? What is it that your body wants? What is it that your heart wants? What is it that your mind wants? What is it that your spirit yearns for? This is the information that's going to tell us what we're doing and where we need to go.
Hmm. And what you spoke to at the beginning in terms of feeling that call towards anarchy and just eating it up. I mean, like, yes, it's something I felt too. When I first read about it, I was like, whoa. I remember skipping through the streets full of joy and life force. And it's something that I've seen in my dissertation and in the people that come onto the podcast for the Relationship Anarchy series, right? There's something that is very somatically felt of
Yeah.
alignment there when we heard these words.
And I think there's the liberation of realizing, oh, I have permission to stop pretzeling myself.
Yeah.
I do not have to make myself small for the sake of social status quo. I have permission to be deeply true to myself. And I think that is both exciting and terrifying because then we have to go, well, what does it mean to be deeply true to myself? Maybe I don't know what that is
Mm-hmm.
yet. And also sometimes we might overreach and like take up so much space with being true to
Yeah.
ourselves that
Yeah.
we push away other people. So
Woo.
it's still a journey of unpacking. And I think this is one thing where within anarchist spaces we need more. I was One of the book promotion events I did was at an anarchist book fair in Victoria, which was a
Cool.
really wonderful, wonderful event. And there were so many beautiful connections that I got to share with people there. And something that I noticed was that the environment in there, like there was something in the air that felt really grumpy.
Mm.
Like people were smiling and laughing but like there was a kind of grumpiness. And I'm like, I think this is actually in a lot of anarchist spaces,
Yeah.
we can get mired down with our own frustration or feeling like I'm different. No one else is going to understand me.
Mm.
It's me against the system. It's
Mm.
us against the world. And that can feel like really overwhelming.
Yeah.
And I really, really want to invite those in the anarchist space in the world to just like the more joy we cultivate, the more resilience we have. And this isn't just me saying this. I feel like this comes from all of our like anarchist queer elders. I think of people who were leading in the Black Panthers. Like they talked so much about like self-care, like people like
Yeah.
Angela Davis and Erica Huggins. It's like that is our resistance. That is, joy, bringing through, celebrating what we have, defies the systems that say we're not allowed to feel joy. And the more we can grow that, oh, like what's going to become possible?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my inner voice right now is saying that's really hard to do in the States right now. I'm like, what?
Yeah. Yeah.
How?
Well, and this is where building community is so
Right.
important. One of the best books I've read in recent years is Mia Birdsong's How We Show Up.
Mm.
And she went through different communities in the States exploring like, well, how did you actually become a community?
Yeah.
Because and I love this question because I think we often mistake scenes for communities. People talk about the polyamorous community, and I'm like, is it, or is it a scene? Is it a kink community, or is it a kink scene? Like, what makes a community a
It's a
community?
great question.
And we've gotten so into these like siloed nuclear families, you don't know your neighbors, all of this kind of stuff, that it, again, that takes away our resilience, it takes away from our connection.
Right.
And what Birdsong found was that one of the most common ways that people built community was just sharing meals.
Yep.
The power of making food and inviting everyone in the neighborhood to just show up.
Yeah.
And the organic conversations that happen, and the ways that people learn about each other, and then the mutual aid that springs up. And these are all things that the States is now like trying to outlaw, which is like wild. It's insane. I don't want to sound ableist about it, but it is the definition of insanity to try and outlaw compassion, to outlaw care, to outlaw empathy. Like, that's how deeply psychotic the fascist condition has become. And so anything we can do to resist that makes a difference. So having meals with our people, sharing resources, staying soft in ourselves, keeping that warmth and that compassion open. Every morning I do work to like bring energy into my ventral vagal system before I look at my phone, because I know if
Gosh.
I know if the first thing I do is look at my phone, my nervous system is going to spend the day in fight.
Yeah.
But just touching my face, rubbing my eyes, rubbing across my chest and my belly, breathing, humming, all these things that bring that energy into the ventral vagal, so that I'm waking up with capacity. I'm not waking up and then going straight into, the world is on fire.
Now. Yeah.
Because even if all you're doing is microdosing that capacity, as you know, microdoses can have a really powerful effect over time. And sometimes the microdoses are even more effective than the macrodoses.
Yeah. Yep. One of my teachers said, just be outside of your mind for 1 second. Not 1 minute, 1 second, Nicole. Yeah. And I was like, I was like 1 second, 2 second, 3 gone, damn it, because I think I'm in big flight mode right now, where I'm like, create more content, more something, like how do I help the world, right? How do I get going so fast? But I can see how much some of that is just from a trauma reaction to everything happening, because it's like, when do I have time for the joy when this is what's happening? When do I have time?
We have a fix-it response. Like, in addition to fawn, there is a fix-it response. And that fix-it response, I think, is very, very strong for a lot of people right now. Yeah. And I think, again, it comes back to, like, how do we make sure that we are in a resource space? You cannot actually do anything if you're not in that resource space. Like, you're going to have a limit. If you're coming into the work fawning, you're going to fawn. You're going to miss what's true.
Yeah.
And so the more we take care of our systems and the systems of our loved ones collectively, that's the ecosystem healing, right? And I always go back to these ecosystem analogies, because I think of how, like, you plant mycelium here and you plant the same mycelium over here, they reach each other.
Yes, they do.
They find each other. And so we really you have to nurture and cultivate the mycelium in your own ecosystem, and trust that it will come together. It is moving towards something. And then as you do that, when emergency shows up, when there's an immediate threat right in front of you, you will have the capacity to engage with it. You will have the ability to go, here's the line, here's what we're doing. And you'll know from an embodied space, not from a panicked space.
Such a beautiful invitation to myself and to all of the listeners today. Truly, 1 second at a time. You know what I mean? 1 second at a time.
And who knows what's going to be happening by the time this podcast is released.
Yeah. May it be a better world. I say that as a prayer. May it be a better world when it does.
May it well be. Yeah.
Well, Mel, it's clear that I could talk to you for hours, of course. And so, as we're coming towards the end of our time, I want to check in and see if there's anything else that you want to share with the listeners today.
I think it's that commitment to cultivating hope.
Yes.
I at the end of the book, I wrote something that I call a prayer for the radicals. And it's really about leaving the reader or the listener, if they're listening to the audiobook, with this experience that there is a better future out there. All things pass, all things change. And we can live through terrible things, and that those terrible things don't have to define who we are. I always think of my grandmother. My grandmother survived, was an infant survivor of a horrific genocide in which all the men in her family were killed. And she grew up in a refugee camp in northern Greece. And, this was a really, really rough life. She was sterilized when my mom was born by Nazis. She was put on medications that created a psychosis for her. She went through it. And yet, by the time I was born, and she had started practicing yoga, she'd come into a spiritual practice. She was the embodiment of joy.
Yeah.
And she lived every day that I knew her with joy. And even when things were difficult or things weren't how she wanted it to be, she would find a way to come back to joy.
Yeah.
And I always think back to her of like, yeah, these things that she went through did not define her. I think for a while in her life, they did define her.
Sure.
But she found a way to define herself beyond those things. And I think that is, to me, that's been the most powerful lesson. To go, I don't have to be defined by the pain that I experience. I don't have to be defined by the systems that I fight against. I can be defined by my joy, by my capacity for pleasure. And that is the most radical form of saying, no one gets to control me. No one has that victory over me. Because no matter what, I am free internally. We get so obsessed with this like external freedom, we forget about the internal sense of freedom.
Yeah. Where there's so much more empowerment and choice.
Yeah.
Well, I always do a deep breath at the end. And so really holding that as a moment of pleasure together. Well, Mel, the last question that I have for you today is a question that I ask everyone on the podcast. And that is, what is one thing that you wish other people knew was more normal?
It's normal to feel scared.
Yeah.
Feeling scared, feeling fear is a normal response to not knowing, not having enough information, being unsure, not feeling safe. And I think so often we push that aside. We've been taught to push it aside and not complain. And I think developing a relationship with it that's really loving is a wonderful thing to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. It reminds me of that quote, it's no sign of health to be well adjusted to a sick society.
Yes.
Right? So like fear makes a lot of sense right now. Right?
Yeah.
And when we have plants and a plant, say it dies, we don't go to the plant and say, what's wrong with the plant? We say what's wrong with the soil that it was in.
Yeah. Yeah.
So right now makes sense to be afraid and all of that, right? Look at the soil that we're in right now in this culture. And also I really appreciate your invitation to really embody pleasure as a radical act, right? A political act. I really deeply believe in that. And that's why so much of my work, even though I went into the field wanting to work with sexual trauma, there was a point in my career where I realized, wow, the pleasure side is actually the full healing there. And so
Yeah.
the same thing with all of these systems, so much trauma, but the pleasure, holding that as true resilience under these systems. I really, really appreciate you bringing that to the listeners today as an invitation.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. Yes. Such a joy to have you on the show again. Such a joy. And it won't be the last. It certainly won't be the last. Yeah. Well, Mel, I'm sure everyone is wanting to know, where can they find your book? Where can they connect with you, learn more about you and all of your work?
So you can order the book anywhere you like to order your books. It's Radical Relating, a queer and polyamory informed guide to love beyond the myth of monogamy. And if you're not sure where to get it, you can go onto my website, radicalrelating.ca/book. And there's also the audiobook, which I narrate.
Ah, so cool.
And I'll also add in within the book, there's some illustrations that Joan Trin Pham, a Vancouver artist, did. And she's turned some of these into coloring pages, which I also now have as a downloadable. You can pay on my website. There's a link to that too.
Amazing.
And so there's lots of ways to like engage and integrate the work that's in the book. But for the rest of things, go to radicalrelating.ca. You can follow me on socials on Instagram, Facebook, Substack, and Insight Timer at Radical Relating. And on Substack and Insight Timer, on Substack, I'll add in narration and include some somatic practices. On Insight Timer, I'm adding more somatic meditations on there as each month goes by. And and if people are interested in doing coaching work or doing any of my courses, all the information is there on my website.
So good. And I'll have all of that linked in the show notes below, dear listeners, so you can just go to the show notes and find all of those links there. Again, thank you, Mel, for coming onto the show today.
Thank you for having me. It's always so nice to just like dive deep into the anarchy pieces.
Yes, it's what the people want, you know? Oh, so good. Amazing. Dear listener, thank you so much for tuning in to Modern Anarchy. Thank you for sharing this episode with your friends, with your lovers, with your community. Truly, it means so much to me, and I am so grateful that you are here. If you are wanting to release jealousy in your non-monogamous dynamics and step into compersion and pleasure-filled connection, you can read my book, The Psychedelic Jealousy Guide, for free on my website. There you will also find so many other free resources, including worksheets on how to clearly communicate and set commitments and boundaries within your non-monogamous dynamics, and other ways to practice clear communication about your sexual desires so that you can step into your most pleasure-filled sex and relationships. So head on over to modernanarchypodcast.com to find all of those free resources. And I look forward to seeing you next week.